Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our open house regarding virtual education and a wake-up call for all parents. We're very excited to have you with us tonight. My name is Laura King, and I am VSA's Dean of Students. Let me open us in prayer, and then I will introduce our guests this evening. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for the blessings that you give us each and every day. Lord, we thank you that though you are the creator of this universe, you are the one who also sustains us and you are intimately involved in our lives. Father, I pray that you would bless this time together. I pray that this is a time of enlightenment for our guests. Father, I pray that you would work through this whole session tonight so that we can do our very best to serve you in a better way and to educate children in a way that pleases you. In Jesus' name, amen. So this evening, we have Rachel Minnis with us. She is our coordinator of educational accommodation services here at VSA. And then our guest speaker is Nana Campana. You'll see her name up there next to her picture, Al Marie Campana, but we lovingly call her Nana. She does a lot of work with us as a school for teacher training and so on. And she is our resident guru. So she is a professionally certified educational therapist. She's a cognitive trainer. She is a neurodevelopmental specialist, and she has over 25 professional certifications. She has dedicated her life to serving children, serving families, and helping them overcome learning challenges rather than just simply accommodating them. So her heart is to look at the brain and see what's happening kind of behind the scenes so that she can work with families and see the best way to help them overcome what's happening in their lives. So you can see her logo at the bottom of the screen, the Paper Treehouse. This is her brain training facility in Miami. So be sure to contact her if you feel like she might be of service to your families. And then again, she addresses the underlying cognitive functions that impact learning. And it's not just that these mental struggles are symptoms, but they are issues that can be resolved with proper training. And so that is her goal. So she is passionate about shifting the conversation from this is who you are to this is what's happening to you and it can be addressed. So thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to hearing everything that these ladies have to share with us this evening.
Thank you so much for the very nice introduction, Laura. It's always very humbling to hear. So I am very excited to be with you today to discuss virtual education and special education accommodations. I always say it's a wake-up call for parents when they realize that there's something going on with their child. And more as time has passed, especially after COVID, one of the things that we begin to notice is that there's more and more children that are struggling with attention, more and more children that are struggling with learning, whether that's reading, math. It doesn't matter which arena it is, right? Even socially, we have a lot of students that are really struggling with anxiety and depression. And there's so much that's happening, which is why we titled this a wake up call for parents. I think that we all wish we had this perfect route that we navigate, and that's not usually the case. There's, every rose has some thorns, and the plan of the Lord, we wish it was very, linear, and usually it's not. Suffering tends to be a tool that the Lord uses often. So let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. So I always say it's time to wake up. And the reason why I say it's time to wake up is after COVID, and I'm moving the camera away just so that I can see if you, hopefully you guys can see that. But after COVID, a lot of things shifted. One of the beautiful things about when COVID happened, my children were in Veritas. And so unlike the rest of the world, their world continued, right? School continued, and I was very ready. But that was a very big awakening for a lot of parents that began to have their kids at home and finally realized, wait a minute, it takes so much more to motivate my child to learn, to be able to support my child in their learning and to guide them properly, right? And so it became this big moment of realization, right? A lot of appreciation for teachers came about. A lot of self-awareness happened as well. And even just taking a step back to see, well, what do I really want for my child? And so in order to think about the learning process and see how virtual learning could even be accommodated in terms of how the brain develops, I think it's really important that we take time to really just stop. And I could spend hours talking about the brain. It is so fascinating what the Lord has done when He designed the brain. But there's some very important things to keep in mind as we think about learning, right? Because ultimately, if you have your child enrolled in Veritas, it's because you want your child to learn. You want them to get a beautiful education, become equipped so that they can make an impact in this world. But there's all these elements that have to be in place in order for proper learning to occur. And so understanding that the brain develops from the bottom up and from the middle out is really, really important, because in order for your child to be able to learn and function academically, every step of the way has to be naturally and healthily developed, right? So we have the cerebellum. Usually the brainstem is where it all begins. So you have involuntary responses like the heart, lungs breathe through reflexes. If I hit your knee in the right place, your knee will still move forward. You have postural reflexes. When I move my head and my eyes can stay focused, those are reflexes that are very, very important. Some kids, though, have retained primitive reflexes, and that can affect the connection with everything else. And we'll talk a little more about that. But we have brainstem develops, we have balance, the balance and coordination that happens within the cerebellum. The cerebellum is one of the most fascinating parts of the brain because it's like a mini brain inside everything else, right? It has the most amount of neurons. It's in charge of so much, but a lot of it is balance and coordination. The occipital lobe is the one lobe that is in charge of everything related to eyesight, not necessarily the movement of the eyes, but more the sight, being able to receive the input of vision, and how that visual interpretation happens. So vision is so important. We have an entire lobe dedicated just to the processing of the visual input. The parietal lobe has a lot to do with touch. So think about a lot of the sensory integration that's right at the parietal lobe in the somatosensory cortex. Then we have the temporal lobe, where you have auditory processing, language comprehension, memory information. And all of those things need to be really developed in order for the frontal lobe to happen, to function well. So you have motor control, problem solving, speech production, executive functions. All of those things happen in the frontal lobe. And you're probably thinking, why on earth is this lady speaking about the brain? Well, if you don't take time to really think about the function of the brain and the areas of the brain that are related, then you're going to have a really hard time when your child has difficulties, right? So if your child has a problem in reading, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but hopefully you can, but think of that fourth tier in this upside down pyramid, or triangle. If your child has a problem with reading, or if they have a problem with spelling, or a problem with writing, math, language, any basic academic skill, many times you can't resolve that problem with more reading or with more spelling or with more writing. I know that that's what most schools do. Here at Veritas, we're always trying to find ways of, yes, accommodating, but also finding ways of empowering parents so that they can really build these other elements that have to be built, right? Think of, again, brainstem, a lot of reflexive movement. I'm trying to move the tools out of the way because I can't see my own slides. So 1 second, I'm going to put it up here. Okay, so core learning skills, that's the most important. So sometimes we have a child that has a problem with reading, spelling, writing, even social skills. That's all the way at the top. And the reason why they have that is because it's coming from a deeper place, right? There could be a developmental visual or motor skill delay. Internal organization, sorry, I'm at my dad's, he had surgery, and so he's getting something to help himself. Body and attention, awareness, control, that has to be built before we can move on to the processing skills, before we can move on to the executive functions. Once that foundation is set, then we can deal with reading, spelling, writing. This is really important to understand, right? There is the concept of structured cognitive modifiability. Dr. Feuerstein taught that it is possible to change cognition, but in order for that to happen, you need these very specific things. You need cognitive functions, you need the cognitive map, which is the 7 parameters of thinking, and then you need mediated learning. Now, again, why does this all matter? Well, because if your child is taking classes with Veritas, or in a traditional school and your child is really, really struggling with reading, or they get diagnosed with ADHD, or they get diagnosed with autism, usually what happens is we begin to think this is a forever thing. There's nothing I can do to help my child. They just need extra time. That's not necessarily true. There's many things that could be done to improve the situation that your child might be facing. So what I like about this is that many times, oh, it won't let me go back. There we go. So this bottom part, this is how I typically show it to parents because it's not as overwhelming. But the reality is this bottom part right here of core learning skills and processing skills, it's actually all of these things. And again, why does it matter? Well, because sometimes we think, well, accommodations is going to solve all the problems. And we might get mad at teachers when they don't give the extra time, or when 3 days have passed and your child still is not necessarily getting and progressing the way that you would like your child to progress. Usually, if they're not progressing, it's because, again, academic learning happens all the way up here. Behaviors happen all the way up here. Daily living activities happen all the way up here. But in order for these things to kick in, all of this has to be in place. So I wanted to set the stage for you guys to understand there is so much behind just learning. In order for the brain to learn, these things have to be in place. So all of that, how do we begin to think about ways of helping our children? I love to empower parents with this. You have to keep in mind that the brain has functions in 3 phases, and they kind of happen simultaneously. You have input, elaboration, and output. And I'm going to see if the door, oh yeah, he did close the door. I could hear him. Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. Being at my dad's house is an adventure, to say the least. See, now I need accommodations. All right, guys. So I was saying the 3 phases, it's really important to think that or realize that these 3 things happen simultaneously, right? In order for someone to function day to day, your brain uses input, your senses, your eyesight, hearing, even vestibular system, proprioception, touching, smelling, to gather information from the world. That goes into the elaboration phase where working memory and processing speed usually are measured, right? But that's where the brain is thinking. Cognitive functions come into play at this point. And then there's some type of output, whether that is I put something in long-term memory, or I move an arm. I know I'm Latin, so I'm always moving my arms. So there's some type of output that happens as a result, right? Now, why do I say this? I like to empower parents again with this information, because if your child, let's say you tell your child to spell the word cat, and your child writes the word rat, then you can stop and think, okay, well, why did he misspell that, right? You can do 1 or 2 things. You can say, oh my goodness, you spelled that wrong, right? That's incorrect. Or you can stop and ask an input question. Hey, sweetie, what did you hear me say? Now, if your child still says cat and he wrote rat, now you know that that's in the elaboration phase or the output phase. But maybe he says, you said cat. Well, if they heard, let's say they spelled rat, but you said cat, and when you ask the question, they say, you said rat, they spelled it right. It's not what you said though. So you can say, well, you spelled rat beautifully, but do me a favor, look at my lips and spell cat and see if they are able to get a better output. So just keeping in mind the 3 phases when you're working with your child is very, very helpful. Then you have the 7 parameters of thinking. This is also very helpful because we get to really think about where is the glitch. When a student is really struggling, sometimes they struggle because the content is too difficult. Sometimes it's the modality. Maybe it's the way that it was presented. There's too much information in a paragraph where they don't understand a word, right? The modality that was used to present the content might be something that's not helpful to the student. Or maybe it is in the 3 phases. Maybe they heard you wrong, or they saw it incorrectly, or when they're writing it, they're having a hard time producing it correctly. Maybe it's in a mental operation or in the level of complexity or abstraction. That's very interesting, right? Complexity has to do with a lot of steps. Abstraction has to do with more difficulty. Level of efficiency, which has to do with rate. It has to do with perceived level of effort and accuracy. So again, having the 7 parameters of thinking in mind as you help your child work, even if they have accommodations or not, is going to be really beneficial because you'll have the proper tools to be able to walk your student from whatever situation they're stuck in to moving them to a place where they can actually feel confident. And let's move on. So here's where I want to spend a little time, and I wish this was not so much a webinar, but we can spend time back and forth talking, right? I really believe that mental struggles aren't problems. I believe that there are symptoms that we can address. And so naturally, virtual education, and I have some notes next to me because I thought it would be important. So seize the barriers, built-in sensory solutions. Considering virtual education, right? A child that struggles with sensory integration, the fact that they're at home working in the comfort of their home means that your home is the ultimate sensory friendly classroom, usually, right? And I'm going to give you some tips on how to make sure that that is the case. But naturally, because your child is at home, they tend to be more comfortable, and you can really work on making sure that the environment helps them with that sensory integration. So you can deal with lighting, right? Making sure that things aren't too bright or that they're not too dark. You can control sound. You can even put headphones or remove headphones. They can have movement, right? In a traditional classroom, a child has to be sitting down the entire time. For the most part, some teachers have allowed other ways of learning in their classroom, but a lot of times they just have to sit for a long period of time. Usually within our, whether they're doing virtual school with us or any other type of virtual class, there's movement that could happen, right? You can encourage your child to stand, you can encourage your child to sit while they're attending our live classes. They can even fidget on the side as long as it's not a distraction to the input that they're receiving in that class. And you can make sure that they're comfortable, right? In a traditional classroom, you might not be able to put a weighted blanket on your child to help with anxiety. Or have sensory tools available in a traditional classroom if the teacher did not provide that. But in your home, naturally, virtual education brings that accommodation. Then we have seize the rush, flexible pacing and processing. And this one's interesting because we know if you've been a Veritas parent for a while, you know that Veritas is very, very rigorous. But there's a lot of flexibility in that, right? In a traditional school, the child, if the lesson finishes, they have to sit right there and complete whatever work the teacher asks them to do. And then they have to transition to another class or maybe to lunch or to recess, wherever it might be. Virtual education that Veritas provides actually naturally provides this great flexible schedule. When you create the schedule for your child, especially if your child has special needs, it is very important that you consider how much time are you going to give your child in between classes so that they have a moment to pause, a moment to recalibrate, maybe a moment to prepare for the other class. If you're doing the You Teach class, you can even, or maybe the self-paced class, you can rewind, you can pause, you can move ahead. There's an extended processing time built into those interactions naturally, right? Because when the class finishes, our classes are every other day. So they have naturally an additional time that they can use to be able to complete the work. I know it's rigorous, but naturally it's built in where they don't have to see their teacher every single day. That means that you don't necessarily have to race to keep up with the classroom pace. I know that during live classes, teachers are going through and completing the work, but the teachers offer office hours. So you're always welcome to have your child attend the office hours so that they would be able to take advantage of a more relaxed explanation if that's needed. When it comes to seizing, and by the way, the word seize for me, it's just seizing them as information. I want to seize the knowledge, this concept that mental struggles are problems and you're stuck. It's like a life sentence that you have to live with. No, there's things that we can do to move ahead. So that's why you see that in capital. So seizing communication barriers. So there's some kiddos that really struggle with dysgraphia, for example. These students have the chance of doing text to speech. They have the chance of being able to type, and then sometimes they're able to use, depending on what class, spell check. Those things are very valuable. So it takes away this pressure of it always has to be presented in the same way, right? Having to write for long periods of time if they're having difficulties. There could be voice recordings that, and even the archive for each class. If your child needs to listen to something again, you can replay it, and have your student really understand until they get it, right? They can go back and they can watch those classes as well. And then there's a chat participation. They can, this concept of being in a classroom and having to always be present and scared of when you're going to be called, that doesn't happen here. They have the chat, they're not necessarily seen, they can participate and not have this fear of what are others going to say. Then we have C's executive function struggles. And I love that because there's a lot of things that have been pre-organized for your child, right? So it's almost like putting cognitive crutches on what is going to be due. Typically in a traditional school, kids have to write their homework down, and there's all these extra steps, which means there's all these little moments where information can totally fall through the cracks. Here, there's a CAS. From the very beginning of the year, you know exactly what's due and when it is due. So there's this digital organization that has been created, which helps remove some of that stress that kids have with executive functions. It's very, very easy to track what's due and what isn't due. You have the dashboard in Schoology where you are able to see if anything was due. What's due is right in front of the student at all times. And if there is any moment where they, for whatever reason, they missed it, there's a notification that will pop up for them as well. And one of the things that I absolutely love about Veritas is how easy it is to really communicate with the teachers. So if you can definitely, if you're feeling stressed about something that your child is going through and you would like to know how to best help your child, Veritas has tons of resources, right? I am available to be able to do some consultations. The teacher is available to be able to give you ideas on how to best help your child for that particular subject. So you're definitely not doing this alone. And then seizing social anxiety, naturally, the fact that they're home in a comfort of their home, and not necessarily being seen all the time. Usually that's helpful. They get to choose when they're going to participate. Maybe if you know your child has anxiety, having a little conversation with your teacher would be helpful. But naturally, virtual education accommodates that, right? If your child is nervous, being home, it already begins to remove some of that. And then the last thing, because they are online, there's natural tools that level the playing field, right? You have text to speech and speech to text that is available if your child has some type of disability that does not allow them to write well. You have interactive platforms, there's visual organizers, there's progress tracking. There's even some tools that if you need additional information on how to get access to them, that would read to your student, right? Depends on the needs that your student may have. So again, the point of this particular slide is all about understanding that virtual education naturally begins to accommodate. But the reality is that we still have some kids that need a lot of help. So what do we do to help them? Let's set up some clear expectations. I do recommend that you create a designated workspace for your student, right? Set specific expectations and tasks, define a specific schedule. If they have live classes, make sure that that's predetermined and that you have ways to remind your student to log in, to make sure that they're attentive. Make sure that you're willing to redefine, especially if this is your very first year as a with your child in virtual education. Make sure that you're willing to be like, okay, that didn't work. Be flexible. Manage your expectations, right? A lot of parents think that it's going to look just like a traditional classroom. Your child is going to sit the entire time. That's not necessarily the case. My own children, sometimes they work from bed. Sometimes we have a ball pit. Sometimes they get in the ball pit. And at the beginning, I was very strict. No, this is school. But at the end, if that's the environment that they're comfortable in and they are able to pay attention, I've learned to be very flexible with that. Now, I do say, let's watch out for red flags. Here are some common red flags that I think are important. We have academic disinterest, right? If you have a student that has lack of enthusiasm for reading or writing, or if there's any difficulty understanding abstract ideas, that's a red flag. I'm not saying your child has a learning disability. I'm just saying, especially if they're really young, naturally, kids that are very young, all that it takes for them to want to do something, like continue to try to do something, is encouragement. Usually you tell a child, oh my goodness, you did that very well. And they want to replicate it, right? That feels really good. They want to replicate it. When a child is no longer enthusiastic about it, and they're kind of avoiding it, there's multiple ways they can avoid it. They avoid it by laughing, right? Becoming funny, acting like something hurts, just becoming disengaged. I have students even that will act like they didn't hear me, right? When that begins to happen, it is really important to keep in mind that that academic disinterest could be a red flag. Something's up. That would be a good time to talk to one of the teachers and say, hey, do you notice this also happening in the classroom? Another common red flag, social difficulties, things like meltdowns, poor social skills, disruptiveness, always wanting to, lots of movement as well. With memory, trouble memorizing things, remembering things. Even if you give multiple step commands, right? Let's say they say, go to the bathroom, pick this up, go do this and do that, and they only complete one of those things and don't even remember that you mentioned the rest, red flag, something to really pay attention to. Focus, right? Being able to follow directions properly, staying focused, or if they have too much attention in something or too little attention in something, those are red flags. And again, pace, working at a slow pace, unable to finish a task, slow reader. And with pace, I would also say to keep a good eye on perceived level of effort. A perfect example would be my own daughter. She would kill me. She knows I'm saying this, but my daughter typically works at a really nice pace. She gets usually hundreds or 98s, but she feels that it was the hardest thing in the world, right? That perceived level of effort, that it's like the end of the world, that's not efficient. That's a red flag that we need to pay attention to. Now, why does that matter? Because here are some common learning disorders, right? You have dyslexia, which is usually learning difficulty with reading, dysgraphia, learning difficulty with writing, dyscalculia, learning difficulty with math. And there's all sorts of variations of these. And again, a lot of people think, oh my gosh, my child has dyslexia, they will never read. That's not true. We can accommodate them until we get them ready to read, and we can empower you to be able to get them there, right? But it's important that you know that these things do exist. And if you think of that learning continuum, if the child is struggling with reading, we want to figure out, well, why is this child struggling with reading, right? Where in that continuum did they get stuck, and how can I help support them? How do I accommodate them until that area of the brain becomes stronger? Here's some other, sorry, I gotta move the tools again. Here are some other disorders that affect learning. You have dyspraxia, which is motor skills. Obviously, this would affect a lot with handwriting. It affects fine motor skills, gross motor skills as well. Auditory processing disorder is a very common one that we're seeing more and more, and visual processing disorder. So this does not mean that the child cannot hear or perceive sound. It just means that the way that the child perceives sound is not necessarily accurate. And so as a result, it affects learning, right? We go back to that, the example of rat and cat. That was actually my son. He would come home with these spelling tests. Every word was spelled right, but he had a 0. It didn't make sense to me until I went to the teacher and looked at the original list. That's when we discovered he was having some difficulty with the way he processed sound. He could hear perfectly fine, but the way his brain was processing that sound was not really accurate. So we had to really work hard and making that better. And again, we accommodated that student by telling the teacher, hey, make sure you look in the eye, have him look at your lips, and just always ask the question. Don't tell him it's wrong. Just say, hey, what did you hear me say? Those are some tools that you can use. I was going to do an ADD simulation, but I know it's 8:30. And so, but I suggest you do two things. Go ahead and look up an ADD simulation or ADHD simulation. YouTube has one, and see how you feel with that. And also look up dyslexia simulation. Both of those are really, really it just gives you this new sense of empathy. And I recommend that you, as a parent, if you have a child that has been diagnosed or you're seeing some reading difficulties, that you take a step back, or even attention difficulties, that you take a step back and you try to find a way of understanding how that feels, right? Because the fact that you can't see the disability or that particular challenge in that moment doesn't mean that it's not real, right? Imagine what it would be like if we told people without legs that they had to go up the stairs no matter what. That's sometimes what we're doing to these kids that have some very serious visual processing problems and auditory processing problems, right? We're like, well, you're just lazy. You have to work harder. And here's a poem from a girl that was dyslexic. She said, I am not gifted. When I read, the words twist, twirl across the page. When they settle, it is too late. The class has already moved on. I want to catch words one day. I want to hold them, then blow gently, watch them float right out of my hands. Um, Incredible, right? Again, tools like text to speech would help someone like her be able to compose something like this, but the heart behind how she's feeling, right? It's always too late. By the time my brain finally catches on and that processing speed kicks in, or my working memory that is weak kind of holds everything together, now it's too late. The class has already moved on. So, to avoid your child feeling those things, accommodations again are very important. So, second, be prepared. Consider that you have home life, social life, academic life. Here are some really cool tools and things that you should do, right? Print your child's assignments. We call them the CAS, the course assignment sheet. Create checklists for your child. Be committed, be flexible. Make sure that you collect resources to be able to help your child. Encourage them to take notes and to go back to that archive. There's tons of things online that you can do to really prepare your student to take notes. Be willing to, with home life, avoid social media during school hours. Maybe remove the phone, right? Those are big distractions. Make sure that you somehow track that they only have one tab open if they're doing live class. Social life, make sure that you plan virtual play dates and talk to your child. When you homeschool or you're doing virtual schooling with Veritas, it's amazing. We have the end of the year gathering, which is phenomenal. My kids have made their best friends there. The chat box becomes a huge tool for them to interact during class. And then they have other resources, but you have to be intentional in making sure that you include those elements of social life in your child's life. So again, be prepared. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I know this is all supposed to be about accommodations, but the reality is it is hard and not everybody will understand it. When you put your child in Veritas or in any other type of virtual environment, the reality is that you're first going to really struggle if it's your first year by nature, right? There's so many moving parts and your child is getting used to something new as well. And some people will have opinions. So you have to make sure that you stick to your ground. If this is something the Lord called you to do, make sure that you surround yourself with people that will understand. I know that Veritas even has a Facebook group where people get to ask questions all the time. I've met beautiful people and families through those groups, some local families, and I've been intentional in having my children interact with the local students. So make sure that you do that so that you have a community that you can ask for help, right? Don't compare your beginning to anyone else's middle. I remember when I first became a mom and I would look in Facebook at everybody's lunches and things like that. I would always cry. And my husband's like, you keep comparing your disaster, right? Your inability to someone's picture perfect. Maybe they just did that for that picture. And at the end, behind the scenes, their child is crying and we didn't even know, right? So make sure that you don't compare your beginning to anyone's middle and you don't compare your child's beginning to anyone's middle and your child's progress to anybody else. I always tell the students, God gave you your own set of fingerprints. That's on purpose. He wants you to be you. And the Lord didn't make a mistake when he made that brain. He had a plan and it's a plan of good. We just have to teach your child how to function with that brain. And in the meantime, you as a parent need to make sure that you do everything so that you support the development of that brain. Make sure that you connect with friends, teachers. I always say Google is your best friend as a parent to be able to find additional tools that will help you. And in Veritas, having communication with the teachers, participating in groups. I know that Veritas has clubs. All of those things is going to be very, very helpful. And that including kids in house chores. That's really important. It gives them purpose. If all your child does all day is sit at a live lesson and then completes a little homework and then plays video games, that slowly but surely will affect their mental health and will affect all sorts of other things. So really important that you include them in house chores, that you are intentional about going out with your child, give them additional things that they can be purposeful in. And again, don't forget to have fun. Encourage your child with lots of effective feedback. We here at Veritas, we talk a lot whenever we're doing teacher trainings. You can say, wow, you're so smart. Well, guys, that can be replicated. But if you say, wow, I really loved how you worked hard until you finished that task, next time that that child might struggle with something, they're going to remember that what you praised was the fact that they worked hard until they finished. That can be replicated. That's effective feedback. Make sure that you reward. A lot of parents are always thinking like, oh, how can I reward? And they want to give or stickers, or they want to give ice cream. My daughter is always asking for ice cream, things like that. But the reality is, what your child needs the most is time together, time with others, play educational games, go on virtual field trips or physical field trips, plan to craft together, do things as a family, have fun as you do this, right? The accommodations that we can provide as a school will only go as far as helping with the academic. But as you see, there's this huge pyramid that has to be really fostered and developed. Their central nervous system has to be in place. Taking them out to do all of these additional activities will help develop visual perception, visual motor, all these things that have to be in place so your child can learn properly. Make sure that on top of that, you talk to your child. It helps them develop labels. I love these two quotes. To teach is to learn twice. I always say, try to give your child, after they get out of class, have them teach you whatever they learned, or give them a chance to teach it to a sibling. And then it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. So make sure that you find a way of sparking curiosity in your child. Now, virtual accommodations, I believe that Michelle is going to post for you. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly. Well, let me see before I do that. In the chat box, I think she has put the link, and I'll make sure to share it and talk a little bit about that, and that I'll be quiet. And Rachel will take over. So it says, don't let schooling interfere with your child's education, right? That's important. Schooling is a tool in the hands of the Lord that ultimately is meant to have us discover him, understand him, get to know him so that we can enjoy him forever, right? So make sure that you find a way of making schooling a tool that empowers your child to be able to know Christ in a better and more complete way. So I wanted to give you my contact information so that you would have it. There's my phone number and my email. I don't know if you want to take a quick screenshot, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly, and I'm going to open this virtual accommodations because I just want to talk to you about how it works and how it's going to be helpful to you. So let me share this again. And I'm going to do this one. Okay, so you're going to notice that all I did is I uploaded the typical accommodations that are provided in a traditional schooling, right? And I gave you the alternative, how virtual learning typically has, right? Some of them are naturally embedded in the schooling that you're part of, right? In our case, Veritas has a lot of these things. If you think about format pages with fewer items per page or line, I mean, they can, if there's text that's online, they can make it bigger. Even with books, I know that my daughter sometimes was like, oh, I need less. She would take a picture of the page and then on her phone or on her tablet, she would expand it and make it bigger. So there's naturally things are built in. And so this tool is going to be helpful for you to see the types of accommodations on the left side. You have the types of accommodations that usually are part of a traditional school. And on the right, we see the virtual learning alternative, which a lot of them are by nature, just because they're home and they're learning in an online environment. Some of this is already naturally embedded into that. Okay, so hopefully I'll stick around for questions. Rachel, take it over.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Let me share my screen now. and get in slideshow. Okay, if you can't see that, please come on and let me know. But I will talk about accommodations with the school. And we have students who are actually diagnosed and do need accommodations beyond what you can just provide through virtual learning. Okay, let me actually go back one. There we go. So if we have learning or physical disabilities or some other medical need that's documented, we can give you accommodations through the school. And it's actually a benefit to you to get that documented and that timeline starting because if you wanted accommodations on the SAT, ACT, the CLT, or even in college, they're looking for history. Okay, so first, we get that information that you want to get accommodations for your student, and you have to turn in your documentation with that. Then I will go and review that, call you, and come up with a plan for your student that's going to work. I'll probably ask you what they struggle with in their current school and pair that with what we can do in our virtual environment, and of course, the doctor's needs. So then that goes to our Dean of Students, Laura. At the beginning, you met her, and it is just looked back over. Sometimes she has other things to add, and then it's approved by our admin. And that then gets communicated to teachers. They'll be notified of those approved accommodations and what they need to implement in the classroom. I have a team, it's me and another academic advisor who really tries to take a lot of that work off the teachers. So we do the Schoology setup, the behind the scenes. Their responsibility would be checking in with you and making sure they grade accordingly. Okay, and then I'll communicate back to you guys what is approved. And then once school starts, we really set that all up. It doesn't have to be at the beginning of school. This can be at any time, but we're just waiting for that to happen for the upcoming year accommodations. All right, the most common ones are untimed assessments. So we actually make a copy of all of the assignments that have a timer on them in Schoology, make them the exact same questions, grading scale, all of that, copy it, and turn the timer off. Then it is assigned to only those students with accommodations. No other students can see it in the classroom, but the teacher can, of course, see all of them. Okay. Another big one would be participation modifications. So let's say if a student has ADHD and they can't keep up with the polls in class, the chat box that's going really fast, the notes on the screen, and then all of a sudden they're asked to come on and share on mic and video, and they just can't. There's too much going on at all one time to reconnect and share and answer the teacher. We can modify participation in some way. Maybe the chat box is the most distracting, and we would take that out or excuse it from their participation grade, just for one example. Extended days to turn in assessments, tests, and exams. That is a big one. We have a lot of assessments due on Fridays. So if you're in, 4 or 5 live classes and you have 4 tests untimed on Friday, that can take a while. And so we give extra days without late penalties. And then, of course, use of dictation and audiobooks. Those are very commonly used. A lot of students are allowed to use the audiobooks, but we'll put it in a plan, for anything in the future for college too. So I do have that full picture future view in mind as well. So how would you start? Well, first you would need, a diagnosis or a medical concern, whatever that is, but some sort of documentation from a professional. And then you will submit the accommodations form, which is in Schoology and the parent group resources. Or if you need anything, you can always call service, or I have my email at the bottom. We'll get that to you. Then, like I said, all the process will begin. And when classes all load in August in a couple of weeks, That's when me and my other advisor will hop in there and we're setting up everything that we need to Schoology wise. And then I'm doing the communication with all of the teachers for you. Okay. I have my email there if you have questions or concerns. And that's an overview of what we do for accommodations for the school. All right, let me exit here. Oopsie. There we go. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. That's great information for everyone. If anyone has a question, there is a Q&A, I guess, section at the bottom of your screen. So you are welcome to ask any questions that you might have. And we'll give everyone a few moments to be able to enter some questions. So it does look like we have one question that came in. So this one would probably be a good one for you, Nana. And you did touch on this a little bit in your presentation, but it says, how do I know if my child has a diagnosable learning challenge? I know that's a very broad question.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a very difficult question to answer in general. There's a lot of things that go into it, right? So think of the red flags that we discuss. I think it's a lot of thinking through how much is this affecting my child, right? How limited is he in accessing the learning that I need him to access? Because there's some children, let's say that it relates to attention. There's just children that naturally move a lot, but they're still performing and they're still doing well. That versus a child that's crumbling and having meltdowns, right? That's why paying attention to those red flags, the moment that we see that it limits them from being able to accomplish the things that they want to do, at that point, I would say it might be a good idea to, start looking at, are their eyes working fine, right? Take them to an optometrist. Then are their ears going okay, right? Take them to an audiologist. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that's how I would think about it. If there's something that limits learning and it's consistent and it's not getting better with different changes, I would try to seek and see if there's anything else happening inside.
That's a good starting point for everyone. All right, that's great. I think this next question will be directed toward Rachel. It says, would my student qualify for an EA for a physical condition versus a learning challenge specifically? So how does Veritas handle that?
Oh, yes, we have plenty of students with accommodations who have physical limitations. Cerebral palsy. I know I have one student I advised and she couldn't type. So she had a talking and it would type for her monitor. And yes, we want to get those implemented so the teachers know and modify assignments as needed.
And very, very well. What about extended illnesses? So you mentioned a physical condition, but what about just a child that just goes through a lot of illnesses, kind of to add to that?
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's approved as well. So we want to help you with what is going on in your child's life, whether it's for years to come or just what's going on right now. They're struggling with migraines. I know I have a couple of EA students with that, and they have to log out of class. And so we want to give you that time and really meet your kid where they are.
That's very good. Next question. Can VSA implement everything that is on my existing IEP?
Um, so an IEP, that can be proper documentation, of course, and we would go through that and see what could turn into the virtual learning. For example, having a note taker sitting with you or a one-on-one kind of aid. We don't have that to offer. But like Nana said, there is a lot already built up through choosing virtual learning that you can accommodate at home. And some of those lines, if they're written one by one, I can go through them with parents who are new here and say, you could do this one at home, this will implement this way. So I'm calling and getting a one-on-one conversation with you and really trying to find your needs and what we can put through in our classroom.
Very good. And Nana is also a really key player with that as well. So she helps us wrap our heads around some different aspects of these accommodations that we might not think of up front. All right, our next question, it says, my daughter has been diagnosed with dyslexia and dyscalculia. She will be entering the 6th grade. Would you suggest that she takes her grade level English language and grammar with live courses as well as math? She currently finished 4th grade level math.
So I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm sure you will have a way better. So, but here's my thought as someone that typically works with, I think you have to think about, why are you homeschooling, right? The fact that she finished 4th grade now, might be an indication that you're still trying to work toward mastery, especially with that math and reading. So I have students that are in 6th grade, or in 7th grade in our academy. We have a tiny little physical academy in the paper treehouse, and they take Veritas classes, and they've taken I go for mastery level, right? The level that they're developmentally in, because I'm trying to build. There's some things that are absolutely necessary academically, in terms of progression. So you might end up, if they have dyslexia and dysgraphia, if you don't continue to build on the academic content, right? Think of that wheel that I showed earlier. If content becomes too difficult, you're going to exacerbate the symptoms of the dyslexia and the dysgraphia. So just be very cautious there. I would try to stick to the younger grade. And like I said, I had a 7th grader that was taking a 5th grade class, because that's where she was, and she didn't even notice. Because the Veritas teacher, which was in the case Miss Demi, she included her and asked her questions, used her as a leader. And my student didn't even realize that she was so much older than everybody else, and now is ready to do pre-algebra. So think about, make sure that you build that content, especially if those foundational parts are still weak. You don't want to exasperate in the content area.
And you didn't even know it, but you led us right into our next question, which has to do with students who are a little bit older taking courses. So it says, do we make exceptions for maximum ages listed for high school classes, for example? So how do we handle the age difference based on just standard expectations?
Those kind of exceptions, we would ask Dr. Cannon, he's our headmaster, and case by case basis get those approved. But yes, I've seen that happen. If you're a year older and just dealing with some sort of grade change, or maybe you're trying 3rd grade and you want to possibly have that be 4th in the future, yes, we can get those approved for you.
Well, and I can say as a teacher, that's very often that I have a range of 3 to 4 years across the students in the class. And it really is just going back to what Nana said too. It is just about engaging the students, meeting them where their needs are. And we don't point out, oh, you're 13 and everyone else in your class is 11. Now they have conversations, how old are you? When's your birthday? But I have personally never experienced an issue where someone steps back and says, oh, you're so young, or oh, you are so old to be in this class. They just roll with it. And we have such a friendly environment that I've never witnessed it being an issue with that. So hopefully that answers your question. All right.
Can I add something to that,
Of
Laura? I'm so
course.
sorry. So another thing too, there's a natural accommodation, because I know that the question that question usually comes from the concern of, oh my gosh, my younger child is going to be with these older kids. What things are they going to be exposed to? The reality is your child is safe at home, which means that you still have full control of the things that your child will be exposed to. And the teachers are very cautious in what they are allowed to share within the chat box. Everything is subject related, which also is helpful, right? So it brings that piece of, okay, my child might be young and there's a child that's 3 years older or 2 years older. You don't have to worry about what you typically would have to worry about in a traditional classroom.
And there are a lot of layers that we consider. as we look at exceptions like that. So it's definitely something that we take on a case by case basis. It's not something that's just standard, and we want to make sure we review what's going on in each individual situation. All right, the next question, will my accommodations carry to another school if I leave VSA? And then how does that look what does it look like when my student goes to college?
Yeah, I can handle that. Like I said in my presentation, you want to get a history started if you have a student with a diagnosed disability that needs accommodations. So, I write letters to future schools, future colleges that say when our student was at Veritas, this is what we did to accommodate them. And some of them actually say small group testing as done at home, so I'm not including only what we do in Schoology. So, yes, I can write that for your future schools. It's up to them how to implement that. Private schools will often be different and do their own thing, but yes, we will give that history to your next school or college, even.
Yes, and legally, if your child has a diagnosis of any kind and is, for example, in a traditional school, would have received an IEP, your child, when they go to college, especially if it's a public college, they would receive those accommodations in school. So that those would continue as well.
Right, and that's why it's important to have current documentation so that the college is not trying to determine an accommodation for a child that was tested at 8 years old. A lot of things can happen between 8 and 18. So very well. Thank you so much. All right, our next question. Will the other students in my class know that he has an accommodation? And I can answer this from the teacher's viewpoint. Unless the students specifically share with one another, the students don't even think to ask. If I was in a class with Rachel and Nana, I wouldn't think to say, hey, do one of you guys have an accommodation? So unless a student just feels really comfortable, there is no documentation that's visible to the students in the classroom. There's no treatment within the classroom that would point arrows and draw attention to your child. Now, if the student has the accommodation never to come up on webcam, I've had students say, why doesn't Rachel have to come up on webcam? And the teachers are very gracious in the way they handle that. Just like, you know what, we have a situation, it's all worked out. Do you worry about you? You take care of your participation, and then we just move on. So there are a lot of ways that we can work around that. Okay, another question. When it concerns financial aid, are there any exceptions, especially if your state does not participate in ESA? This is a question above my pay grade. So Rachel or Nana, do either of you know how to answer this?
Our fee is nominal. We are trying to not charge a lot. I probably should have said that. The first year you're in accommodations, it is $150 to get your student enrolled, set up. We start that history, like I was saying, have a conversation with you, a working plan throughout the year. After that, you can pick and choose what class. So it's $150 minimum and 50 per course. So technically 3 classes minimum. And we're talking live classes here. So beyond that, the subsequent years, you can pick and choose. I want it for this class, not that class, and it's 50 per course. So there is a fee. It's to really recoup the time that it takes to go in. If you can imagine when you see Schoology and all the assignments that are timed, untiming them, assigning them to only your child, you're really just paying for that time. We're not charging beyond that.
And in relation to the scholarships, I know that Veritas is actually an approved provider, at least in the state of Florida. I have not finished the research to see if they're approved providers for the rest of the scholarships, but Veritas Scholars Academy shows up under the step up in a step up EO, the unique abilities. So if you're in the state of Florida, I know that's going to be a given for the EAS.
Yes, and most of those you're just submitting for reimbursement. So if you need documentation beyond a receipt, I can write that for you.
Well, and my understanding is that there are more and more states that are coming on board with these specific types of funds. So that's exciting to watch. And so I would just recommend that you um, just do some research on your particular state. And then you can also contact the school and we can see if it's a state that is in progress with us or if we have any other information for you. All right, I see one more question up here, and then we'll just see if you guys have anything else before we end for the evening. Do accommodations really work in an online environment?
Oh
It's funny.
gosh, we're
We're
playing
both like,
tag.
who's
We
gonna
can both
tackle it
actually
first?
talk.
All right, go ahead, beautiful. You go.
Okay. I have been the coordinator for 4 years now and seen many, many students graduate with Veritas with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and the accommodation. We're just trying to level that playing field for them, and they can be absolutely successful. And I've seen it happen a lot. So, Nana, in her presentation, said the benefits of having a virtual online environment might actually be what's best for your students. So I'd say absolutely yes, it can work.
Yes, and I second that. I think obviously because I believe that mental struggles are not problems, they're symptoms and they can be fixed. I think that accommodations should be treated as a temporary thing until we can get them to the next place. But yes, accommodations definitely level that field and make learning accessible to children that couldn't access it without it.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. I do not see any other questions coming in. So I guess we've covered everything from A to Z. So anyway, for those of you who have joined us for this session tonight, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much to Rachel and Nana and Michelle for running the meeting and Francine for being here with us also as our head of diploma services. And we wish you all well and we look forward to blessing you this year. Have a good evening.